Benvenuti a tutti, sono molto lieto di accogliere in questo primo webinar della serie Asimmetrie incontra il professor Rodrigo Zeidan, che lavora alla New York University in Shanghai, autore di un importante testo Economics of Global Business, edito da MIT Press, e membro del comitato scientifico di asimmetrie, e con Gianclaudio Torlizzi, il fondatore e presidente di T-Commodity, un consulente molto ascoltato nel campo delle materie prime, autore di Materia Rara, che fra l'altro sempre in questa serie di webinar verrà presentato nella serie Asimmetrie Presenta fra 9 giorni, il 26 maggio. L'argomento di oggi è la conseguenze del lockdown cinese, in particolare di Shanghai, sull'economia cinese, sull'economia mondiale, sull'inflazione, sulle catene logistiche internazionali. Abbiamo in Rodrigo uno studioso e un testimone eccezionale, perché lui in questo momento è lì. Quindi good evening Rodrigo, good morning Gianclaudio, because we have 6 hours far apart. We will try to continue in English. English will be the working language of this webinar. And I give the floor to Rodrigo, who will give us a nice presentation. Il Barbiere di Shanghai, un'opera in 3 atti. So let's...
Grazie mille Alberto, grazie a tutti. Mi italiano non è perfetto, però perdon. Sorry about that, everybody. My English, I wish my Italian was better. I also get nervous whenever I have to speak in Italian. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to meet you, Gianclaudio. And what we're going to do is really discuss how things are in Shanghai, right? So I made a let me put the screen, let me put the slides. I shouldn't be doing slides, right? But I wanted to bring you some data, right? And I made a joke, Il Barbiere de Shanghai. As you can see, maybe I need a barbiere now because I cannot go anywhere and I haven't been able to go anywhere since March 24th. Now, I was in Europe when the lockdowns started in Europe. I was actually in Madrid, and unfortunately with Bergamo, Madrid was the epicenter of COVID in early 2020. What happened is that there is something different in Shanghai, right? The lockdown here is not the same type of lockdown that people experience in Italy or in Spain. To give you an idea, in a city of 28 million people, 0 cars, 0, not 1, not 2, not 10, not 100, 0 cars were sold in Shanghai in April. But how is that possible? Well, let me show you why. Let me show you why that was possible. Let's start. This is, so let me explain. This is a video that I recorded. I can get out of my apartment once a week. I have a special dispensation to get out because I can cycle to the medical clinic to get some medicine that they need to check my passport. But nobody else in the building, other than somebody who needs to go to the hospital, can leave the hospital. So I'm cycling to the clinic, and let me show you how is Shanghai, or how was Shanghai a week ago.
So this is Dongfang Luo. Oh, we can see a nice little cat here. Hope he's not getting, or she's not getting hungry. This is Dongfang Luo. It crosses with Central Avenue, which is the largest avenue in Pudong, Shanghai. As we can see, I can cycle in the middle of the street and nobody cares. I'm not doing anything illegal. Now it's even green for me. Such is the fun life of my 20 minutes freedom run during the harshest lockdown in the world. Here, as you can see, is Century Avenue, and nothing much is going on. And there is the rest of Century Avenue, and nothing much is going on. There are maybe a couple of cars in the horizon. So let me go back home, because I'm not supposed to stay away for more than 30 minutes. Shanghai, Friday, April 23rd, 10:30 a.m.
So this, as you can see, is the largest avenue in Pudong, which is the east of the river in Shanghai. 10:30 a.m. is the end of rush hour. We would have hundreds of cars every hour going there. The city was completely empty. Absolutely, it was like ghost town. And all business were empty and were closed. But more importantly, and we didn't realize that, nobody realized that when the lockdown started, even supermarkets were closed. I tell that story for an article for CNN, but really, nothing was open in the city. And this is one of the effect in the world is there are two effects, right? First, we have a deceleration of the Chinese economy. Because the Chinese economy is very important, what we have is a deflationary pressure around the world. For instance, exports from Italy to China are going down, partly because nobody can buy anything. In Shanghai, not even purchasing things online everything was closed. It was a problem getting food in the beginning. But the other problem, and is a more important problem, is a supply issue. So if this were just a deflationary pressure, this would actually be helping the global economy in terms of inflation, which is what is going on in Europe and the US right now, and actually most of the world. But there is another problem, which is the fact that supply chains in China are being affected harshly. Now, the only exception other than hospitals in Shanghai is actually the port. The port in Shanghai is still working. It's not working at full capacity. It is working. How can the port work when society is closed? The reason is it's worked in a closed loop. So what happens is that 20,000 people are living in the port area and they cannot go home. And they've been living there since early April, right? Now, what is really important is that this was a tweet. Like Alberto, I like to tweet a lot. I'm not as famous and I should get my a case to maybe build a brand. I don't have his brand, but this was a viral tweet. It's a tweet that I showed that the port was getting stressed. This tweet got viral to the point that Global Times, which is one of the main newspapers in China, actually wrote an article to show that things were not that bad. And unfortunately, things are not that bad, but things are bad. And the reason for that is very simple. People have different ideas about China. People believe that China is controlled by a group of Illuminati that live in Beijing, give orders, and everybody follows. It's not the case, right? You cannot have that. It's a country of 1.4 billion people. So local authorities have a lot of autonomy. This impacts everybody. For instance, the rules in my neighborhood are different than the rules in different neighborhoods. And maybe that's why I can cycle every Friday to the medical clinic. But the effect is that even though the port is working, the supply chain cannot work at full capacity because each province and each city has its own COVID regulations, which means that in many cases, a truck driver that comes to Shanghai to deliver some cargo, on the way back, that truck driver must spend 14 days in centralized quarantine in many provinces. So at the end of the day, there is a crunch. And that crunch is already being shown in both consumer data and production data. So for instance, this is data about retail sales. So we have two data here that are pretty much the same. We have production and we have retail. And we can see that both have gone down in early 2020, have rebounded very strongly, and are now down again. So unlike the previous round of COVID lockdowns, this is not only a demand issue, this is a supply issue. And this is what people also don't understand, is that China has grown almost 10% a year for over 20 years. For the rest of the world, this, of course, presented many opportunities. China is a huge new consumer market. But China actually exported deflation. That is a reason for why inflation in Europe before this year has been very low since 2009. And is the fact that China, with its huge economies of scale, have been exporting products cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. This has now been reverted almost at once. So all this deflation that was exported by China in the last 10 years is rebounding somewhat and contributing to the inflation around the world. This is more data, and we can see how things have changed. This data also shows one of the main issues in China, which is the real estate market. I remember talking to a friend of mine, and I said, "Oh, I want to visit Parigi. I miss talking to you in Parigi." And he said, "You don't need to worry. Paris is always going to be the same. So if you come next year or come 3 years from now, it's a museum, so it doesn't really matter." That is not true in China, right? This year, and we are in May, and the lockdown started in March, Shanghai has 2 subway lines. I think the new subway line C in Roma has opened, right? After 30 years, is it open? The new subway line that has been being built forever? No.
I don't think so. The C line, or I don't know.
C, linea C.
See, more or less.
More or less.
More or less. How many years? 20 years, right? 20-something years. So in Shanghai, in 2010, when I came here for the first time, there were 9 subway lines. Now there are 17, with 3 more on the way. So pretty much 1 per year, right? So what does that mean? On the one hand, that means higher inflation, and it's inflation that is not going to go out soon. Today, we had an announcement by the Shanghainese government that Shanghai will try to open by June 1st. So 14 days, 2 weeks from now. It's not going to open like cities and countries open in Europe. It's going to be very tentative. And even though Omicron is very, very mild compared to previous waves, the policy direction in China is still COVID zero. It's not a strict COVID zero, it's what they call dynamic COVID zero, but the goal is to have zero transmission, which is almost impossible, as you know. Now, this is not going to change. And there are two consequences from that. First, what is it that is going to happen with multinational companies that are in China, right? After all, we have what is called decoupling between China and the rest of the world, China and the US, something that is started with the trade war between the US and China in 2018, and has continued since then. The new government by Joe Biden hasn't changed its stance on China. So what is going on is that, first of all, one thing that people must understand is that China is not a place where state-owned companies rule. As we can see in this graph, all employment, urban employment in China in the last 20 years has been generated by the private sector. So the private sector is what matters today, right? In many key metrics. But now what we have is a retreat of multinational companies. This is a survey by the American Chamber of Commerce on American companies. But the situation for European companies is even worse. I have many friends who work in European companies, Gucci and Italians and other companies here as well. And they are not retreating from China, but they are afraid, right? And what we have is that already half of the companies, half of the American companies in China are already delaying or decreasing investments. This is already happening. This will accelerate the decoupling between China and the rest of the world. Now, this has huge impacts on all sorts of companies in Italy, from companies that sell luxury brands. Italy is famous for that, but Italy also has a huge industrial manufacturing sector that not only depends on imports from China, but is also part of global supply chains. And this is the main effect. So what is going on in China is going to affect inflation in Italy through three different ways. First, the price of final products. We are already seeing that. The price of final products are going up around the world. And this is because China cannot export a lot of final products that are consumed in some countries. That is actually not a big deal in Italy. What is a big deal is the fact that the price of inputs, raw materials, but more importantly, machines, and all sorts of goods that are used in Italian manufacturing is actually going up. More important than that, sometimes even with higher prices, companies cannot get what they order. This is already going on in, you most likely have seen, the microchip shortage around the world. Car companies cannot produce as many cars as they would like in the US, in Japan, in Europe. This is already going on, right? So you have that. And finally, what you have is a huge decline in orders from China. It's the first time, and this is something that is really important. In 2020, Chinese exports and imports, even with the lockdowns, increased by 3%. Right now, this is the first time since 1980 something that Chinese exports and imports should go down. And the reason that I'm passing the slides very quickly is because this is a conversation, and I don't want to be speaking all the time. I want to have a conversation with Gianclaudio, and I want to give you this information so you, and the slides are going to be there for you after the presentation, right? So we have a problem, which is the lockdowns in China are going to bring economic pain all over the world. Lower sales, higher prices. What we in economics call stagflation. What is the silver lining, right? The silver lining is that even though China is already the largest economy in the world, right? But still, we overestimate China in the short run, and we underestimate the economy in the long run. In other words, let me give you one data point about that. Italy, if I'm not mistaken, has 65 million people, more or less, right? Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. So 65 million people. Now, China has 1.4 billion people. Out of this 1.4 billion people, 450 million people are living in rural areas. These people are not part of consumer markets. These people are living in subsistence, more or less. These people produce less than 5% of GDP. So it's not about recession. It's not about what is going on this year. Imagine what is going to happen in the next 10 years. In the next 10 years, China will bring to the market over 200 million people. So by 2030, 200 million people will become consumers. Imagine what is this? We're talking about 3 times the population of Italy, right? And let me give you one data. China is already an economy that is the largest in the world. This is the amount that people in China consume of services per year, $4.6 thousand. This is what happens in the US. It's 10 times more. Which means that this gap, if this gap closes, the effects on the international economy are going to be tremendous. So companies that are saying, I'm going to abandon the Chinese market, are most likely making a huge mistake. Now, there is a risk, which is the deglobalization, is that China chooses to close off to the rest of the world. Then there is nothing that the companies can do, right? But abandon a market like this, right? Abandon a market in which, as we can see here, agriculture is only 7%. So 40% of the population produce 7% of GDP. All over the world, services is around 75% of GDP. 70 to 75. In China, is a little bit over 50. So that is a huge potential. And this potential, nothing shows this potential more than this graph. So this is a projection that I created. Let me explain to you the projection. Now, this projection compares 2 different data points. GDP per employed person in the US and China. And I chose the US. Of course, I could have chosen Italy, but I don't think making an assumption that Italy is going to grow 2.5% per year for the next 30 years is realistic, right? But In the US, it's more or less realistic. So just so you know, today, one Chinese person produces 25% of an American person. That is what is called GDP per employed person. Now, let's assume that China grows at 5.5% per year, which means that 30 years from now, it will be 3 times the size that it is today, if not more. Whereas the US only grows 2.5%. Now, China will not grow 5.5%, right? And maybe the US will grow more than 2.5%. But even if we assume that, what happens is that in 2050, the GDP per employed person in China is going to be 60% of GDP per employed person in the US. So, is this realistic? This is absolutely possible. It doesn't mean that it is going to happen, but it is absolutely 100% possible. And what this shows is that there is no natural barrier to the Chinese development. There are not internal barriers. They are not given by government incompetence, government misallocation, social chaos, wars, or something like that. If the government can maintain a growth trajectory, Chinese economy will be 3 times the size of the economy that it is today. So when people say, oh, Chinese debt is very high. Yes, it's very high because the Chinese economy is still much below its potential. Like anywhere, you first borrow, then you grow. The question is, will China grow? Again, this was the last lockdown. And what has happened is that the Chinese economy has not recovered in full. And there are many reasons for that, right? One of them being the Evergrande real estate scandal in October 2021. But what matters, and this is some data about the doing business, which has been abandoned because there was corruption about the data. But look at what we see here, right? This is a comparison between my country, Io sono brasiliano, and China, right? Look at what we can see here. For any indicator, Brazil in 15 years is almost flat or decreasing. And China is changing. And I have many stories of that. A friend of mine has a restaurant since 2005. When he opened his restaurant, like in most middle-income countries, when somebody came to, a sanitary authority came to verify if things were going okay, what they wanted was a bribe. Over time, this has changed. And now, 15 years later, a health inspection is actually about health inspection. Right? It's amazing. For a Brazilian, this is absolutely amazing. Right? For a Brazilian, this is insane that this is really about a health inspection. But this is how dynamic China is. Now, that doesn't mean that China is going to be the #1 economy in the world, that China is going to be the geopolitical whatever, that China is going to surpass the US. Look, let's be honest. I teach at New York University in Shanghai. So the Chinese government is asking an American university to come here and help teach their elite how to become global citizens without leaving China. Because what happened in the past and what happens today is that most of the smart people in China, not most, but many of the smart people in China, they go abroad to the UK, to Italy, to the US, and they don't come back. So China wanted to have an American university, top university. My department has 5 Nobel Prize winners. I'm not going to be one of them. I don't have tenure. But this is the difference. And we can see that. If we look at this graph, which is the world of R&D in 2021, you're going to see a lot of South Europe here, a lot of North Europe here, and some outliers are like South Korea because of Samsung, right? And Israel because of the military industry. But China spends half of what the US spends in R&D. And it's very simple. The US will continue to be the most important country in the world as long as the top people in the world, if they want to open a company to make a lot of money, they choose to go to the US instead of going to China or Italy or South Africa or Brazil. So what we have is that some Italians will go to the US to open companies and to study at the better universities and don't return. So the US steals brains, right? I'm a Brazilian. I was stolen to be teaching for an American institution. If a teenager with major ambition and major dreams is looking to move to the US to build a business, the US will continue to be the most important country in the world. Today, that smart individual or ambitious individual does not look at China and say, I want to build the next Microsoft in China. Some Chinese people want to do that. But that means that China is not stealing the best brains in the world altogether. So there is a lot that China must do to really become the most important country in the world. And this is the fear. Deglobalization is a choice. It's not destiny. China is looking to decouple a little bit from the rest of the world, and that is going to come to cost China in the future, right? There is a lot of data. Some of this is about the financial markets. Just to show you what happens in China that people don't understand is that the commercial banks in China, they are state-owned, and that means that they are incompetent. Not necessarily all state-owned companies are incompetent, but the commercial banks in China are. So all this ecosystem exists. So market agents can bypass commercial banks, right? This is my new book. This is the book that Alberto mentioned. These are other books I have written. This is my contact. And I try to be very fast, so now we can have a pleasant conversation with Alberto, with Gianclaudio about, and also, you don't need to worry. We can be here as long as you want because I cannot go anywhere. I am locked down. And as you can see, I'm locked down in my room, in my office. I am in my home, and I'm not going to go anywhere for the next few days at least.
So we are sorry for you. So Gianclaudio, do you have some questions?
Rodrigo, I have a question because I just, my clients are mostly industrial firms who are worried about what might be the impact on the supply chains once China will ease the lockdown. From the logistics side, but also the commodity side. Just to give you an idea, the commodity market, which I follow the most, is already tight, notwithstanding the extreme lockdown taking place in China. Over the past month, we have seen a nice drop of base metals, which, China consumes more than 50%. On a global basis, and they actually dropped down. However, oil, for instance, remain very tight, even if China slowed down the buying pretty much. And we have today the Brent, which is trading above $110 for barrel. So the first question is, what do you expect will happen on the commodity market once China reopen? When it will really reopen, but I think that you already answered to that, but it will be important for the timing, because my personal guess is that once the lockdown will be really eased, we're gonna see another jump higher for commodities, which might have might pressure inflation worldwide even more. And on the logistics side, because for instance, even if China slow down a bit, the container rates remain near historical heights. So three main area of worries among industrial firms, which I would like that you give your point of view.
So let me be very clear. I don't think that Chinese lockdowns that China will return to a normal economy before the end of the year. And the reason is very simple. The president is gonna most likely gain a new term in October, November. And COVID-0 has been a major political victory. So
more than a slowing down economy, more than a collapsing economy.
So that is a very interesting question. Let me explain how things work in China, because people don't understand. Not that you don't understand, but people believe that, as I mentioned, China is a decentralized place. So what does a politician in China must deliver? And there are targets, numerical targets. That's how politicians, there is no democracy, there are no votes. So how can a politician climb? A politician climb by meeting targets, right? There are two sets of targets. One set of target is social order. The other set of target is the economy. Now,
GDP target.
GDP and now even sustainability, renewable energy and stuff like that. But social order is a target that matters as much as the economy. Now, what the Shanghai government tried to do was saying, let's do exactly what you say. Our economy, we sold 0 cars. So let's try to balance these two, right? Beijing said, no, you cannot. Right now, social order is the goal. You have to give us COVID-0. Doesn't matter. Right now, we suspend your economic targets.
Do you think that behind this strict discipline, behind the lockdown measure, there is also a hidden target to contain inflation? And so capping social unrest or social instability?
So no, inflation hasn't been a problem in China. So people here today really fear unemployment, really fear lower income. I have friends who own service business. And unlike Europe or Brazil or the US, you don't have a social safety net here. And right now, I've been talking to friends, and they're like, they have received 0 help from the government. Not all of them, but like, as a citizen in Shanghai, the help that I have from the government is a little bit of food packages every week. So if I were to rely on that, I would be very skinny by now. So gladly I don't rely on them, right? So that is the problem, Gianclaudio. Okay. I believe that balancing these two would be sensible. So let me give a practical example of that. You've seen in Italy and everywhere else, the drones that the government, that some districts in Shanghai send to tell people to keep quiet, don't protest, keep quiet and stuff like that, right? And here's what people don't understand in the West. This is not a sign of the Chinese government trying to control the citizens. It's actually a sign that the governments are afraid of the reaction.
I see.
So
a culture difference.
If people are screaming on this, if people are screaming, they are complaining. And if this becomes a problem, it means that I am a local politician, and it means that my career is going to be derailed. So I send a drone to ask people to be quiet so I can tell my superiors that things are under control.
I see.
Right?
On the inflation side, do you expect that once the lockdown will be removed, a new wave of inflation will take place on the world economy? Because like in a sort of deja vu that we had in 2020, you know? Because on one hand, it is true that in the US, the consumer spending will not be as much as 2 years ago because the helicopter money is not here this year. But anyway, the balance sheet of consumer is still pretty solid. So I expect, and if I look at also the latest GDP data out of the US, the consumer spending was still very solid. So my personal think is that recession pressure in the US, at least for this year, maybe not as big as many are expecting today. So the global demand is still there. So once the lockdown will be eased in China, should we witness a sort of similar dynamic that we saw 2 years ago?
So I think it's a possibility, yes. So let me try to do an exercise in futurology, right? So right now China is giving two things to the world. A little bit of deflation, as you mentioned, because commodity prices have gone down because of the lockdown. But there are supply chain disruptions, right? Which is causing inflation to go up, which you also mentioned. As the lockdown eases, the demand is going to go up and prices are going to go up. Hopefully, the supply chain disruption is going to go down.
But it will take time.
If it happens at the same time, that is fine. But what I fear is that the supply chain disruptions, there will be a problem in timing, and the demand will rebound before the supply chain.
I agree.
And then this is a situation that is going to be problematic. Let me give you a practical example of that. And I was talking to investment bankers 2 days ago, and they wanted to ask me one question. One of them followed the pulp and paper industry, and he's like, the prices are at all-time highs, but the stock of the companies is going down. Why is that? And I told them, look, what is happening is that prices are down because of supply chain disruptions. Prices are up because of supply chain disruptions. So what is going on is that companies, even at higher prices, they cannot physically sell the product, right?
Yeah.
What will happen if, and also, even with these higher prices, the publishing companies in China cannot receive the product. So the stock price is down because price is up, but quantity is down. What happens if quantity rebounds before prices go down? Which I think is not necessarily likely, but is a major danger to the global economy.
Because many are already talking about peak inflation, which is, I find, a little premature. You know what I mean?
So the problem is that if inflation is controlled because China enters a recession, that is bad for everybody. We want inflation to go down because supply chain issues are resolved.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we do have some questions from our virtual floors, and perhaps so. This is from Luca, friend of mine. So our Western companies. So can you
Yes,
read?
our Western companies concerned about supply chain disruption, and our alternative countries to China where they can move. The answer is yes and no. I'm going to explain why. How much do sanctions to Russia affect deglobalization, and relationship China and Russia is likely to intensify? Now, the relationship between China and Russia doesn't really matter. And let me give you a brief reason why. The first question is more important. I understand. So, first of all, China has been very ambivalent about the war. China in the beginning was willing to help Russia with the sanctions. But what we have to understand is that the Chinese economy is 10 times the size of the Russian economy. China is not going to risk its economy, and this is already happening. The Chinese companies will not risk being sanctioned to maintain business ties with Russia. They will keep it if they can, but the rest of the world is so much more important than Russia to China that China is not going to risk its place as the industrial hub of the world to help Russia. Actually, it has moved in the other direction. Every day, China signals that is less of an ally to Russia in this war. However, the problem is that companies are willing to move out of China, right? But right now, companies cannot. And the reason is that no place in the world right now offers the scale that China offers, right? Imagine like China today is by far the biggest trade partner with the rest of the world. We don't have ports. We don't have the infrastructure so companies can easily move to other places. This was already happening. Very low skill companies were already moving to Cambodia, Bangladesh. So you most likely go to Zara and see shirts made in Bangladesh, Cambodia. This was already happening. But you cannot easily get an industrial company and move, because where is the scale going to come from? How are you going to build scale and where? Right? In China, you have a stable environment with qualified people and relatively cheap labor. Are you going to open gigantic factories in Germany? No, that's why they are not there already. So where are they going? Are they going to go to another middle-income country where things are unstable? Are you going to go to Venezuela? No, of course not. To Brazil? With all the tariffs, Brazil is close to the world. So the problem is that a lot of companies want to leave China, even with everything that I said. But a lot of them cannot get away from China very quickly. This is not Russia that Renault just sold the shares in the producer of Lada by 2 rubles. You cannot divest from China that easily. Is that okay?
Even if, the globalization process that you were mentioning is something, I guess, that it's US-led. Of course, China benefited the most over the last 30 years of deep globalization at the expense of the middle class in the West. And also, there was also some issues about technology shift. In China, there is also the feedback from many firms, Western firms, who are not happy with what happened in China, so they don't get the benefit they were expecting. So it's the issues are complex in my view. My thinking is that it is now up to the West to have to decide how to pursue the decoupling. In China, minds, in my view, is not. They, of course, as long as this balance will last, they are happy, of course. The problem is that at the end, in my view, they have to decide. And even because in the US, you have a bipartisan approach against China.
Correct.
You have Democrats and Republicans very much against China. So it's not a matter of, we have seen Trump, Biden, same foreign policies against China. So in my view, it's just a matter of time before we're seeing a deeper deglobalization. That's my point of view.
I agree. I think you're right. But my question is, should Italy follow? 1.4 billion people.
We do
Should
have
Italy abandon the market?
Italy has to, in my view, on a strategic point of view, needs to deepen its ties with the US, but it's my personal point of view. In my view, it makes much more sense for Italy to sell goods in developed markets, in the European markets, in the US markets, than in Chinese market. That's my point of view.
I think that Italian companies sell to all markets. Italian companies make money in Africa, they make money in Latin America, they make money in Asia. So there will be different tiers of companies in different, but that is also not a problem only of selling, but also about sourcing inputs.
May I point out to your attention, there is another interesting question from Guido,
sure,
who is a partner of Asymmetry, by the way. So it's related on your productivity catch-up analysis and on the demographic evolution of China. And this has something to do with what you were saying now. So on the perspective of
let me answer that question. It's an excellent question. So let me answer that question by sharing something from the data on the productivity catch-up is very interesting, but how will demography play a role? China population has peaked, that is absolutely correct. And all forecasts are for a quickly aging and decreasing in the next 50 years. Guido, you are absolutely correct. One thing, and that's why a lot of companies are already moving, low-skilled labor in China is disappearing. China is 100 million people are gonna graduate from university in China in the next 10 years. 10 million people per year. So 2 Italys in the next 10 years. So China will be a medium skill, high skill country in 20 years. But let me show you this data that you just mentioned. Let's see if I can share Chrome tab. That's it. I have the Chrome tab here. Now, this is the world today, 7.7 billion people. Let me go to 2022, which is today almost 8 billion people. This is the world, right? If we go to China, we can see. So hopefully you remember this from your geography classes that that this is. Oh, sorry, that doesn't show very much. So we can see here that China has 1.4 billion people, and it's not going to go up, right? 5 years from now, it's going to reach its maximum, and then it's going to decline. Okay, that's what you said, Guido. Given that China is not a high migrant country, that is what is going to happen. Again, we're going to have a big replacement of low skill to medium and high skill people. Again, I am at NYU Shanghai. This is already happening, right? Of course, everybody knows, if we look at Italy, we also know that this is also a problem in Italy. 60 million people, not 65, and that is all downhill from there in terms of people, right? Now, what is the solution from that? Neither Italy nor China is going to go through, you know how to read this, right? This is female and male, and this is cohort in terms of age. Let me increase so people can see, right? The data. So, of course, some countries can go, oh, like the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Are you prepared to see the data from the UAE? This is the data from the UAE, right? This is a country being built by immigrants right now. 9 million immigrants, all young people building the UAE, right? This is not going to happen. This is not going to happen in China. This is not going to happen in Italy. So this demographic transition is happening. But I don't ascribe a big problem to that. And the reason that I don't ascribe a big problem to that is because I'm seeing in China this replacement of low-skilled workers to degree to more high-skilled people. And what people don't understand is that the level of competition in China is absolutely brutal, right? Kids, when they finish the elementary school, they take a test, a national test called Zhongkao. And if they don't pass the test, they go to vocational technical schools. If they pass the test, they can go to a regular middle school. To come to university, they have to take another national exam called the Gaokao. This is so competitive that at NYU, we only accept people that are at the top 1% of the national exam. So this is a country where education is at the forefront worry of everybody. So this demographic replacement is already happening. So Luca has another question. South Korean firms like Samsung delocalizing in Vietnam, and some others. The problem, and that's it. The problem.
It's more a rejoinder than a question. So he acknowledges that. So your approach was. So we have just a few minutes, and before we end our webinar, and I really thank Rodrigo for being with us. It was a very, very interesting presentation, and also thanks to Gianclaudio for bringing the voice and the worries of the Italian industries facing international markets and facing this massive commodity and supply chain crisis. We will probably meet in some months or weeks if you are available and continue this discussion in the light of the next development. I had a number of questions on the monetary and financial sides of the issue, but we will keep them for the next time. Gianclaudio.
Yes. Yeah. Gianclaudio, I think you're going to get your wishes. I think China will choose to deglobalize as well. China is already choosing that. So these are going to be very difficult times for companies doing business in China. Not from the point of view of the Chinese companies, because the Chinese companies are pretty much aggressive, but from the point of view of the government policy. So maybe you are not only your political leaning, not political, your point about moving to the developed countries, maybe it is strategic because maybe it's a way to beat what is going to happen anyway. But
that's what I'm suggesting right now, because it is better to face some pain in the short term and to reassess the supply chain than to have a much bigger problem in the medium term. So, of course, there is some reluctance by many companies, especially the multinational one, which are used to long supply chain developed over the last 30 years. So it's tough for them now to tell, just cut it and reassess, regionalize all your supply chain in Europe, for instance, or toward the US. But in my view, it's mandatory for them to do like that, because tough times will arrive in the future, and shorter is better now than the longer. That's my view.
So
at least in the industrial firm.
We can end on. Sorry.
That is the question of scale. Right now, there is no scale to accommodate that. So that maybe is an opportunity.
But you don't know. I think you don't need big scale in a decoupling, because numbers will be smaller anyway, in my view. So maybe
100 million iPhones. How are we going to produce 100 million iPhones? 200 million iPhones without.
Probably iPhones in the future will cost much more, and so less people can afford it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that's. But I believe that scale is the main barrier. I'm not saying that it cannot happen.
Our time is over, unfortunately. I see behind Gianclaudio his book Materia Rara, which we are going to present in 9 days. Quindi due parole per i nostri amici italiani che hanno avuto la pazienza di seguirci. Fra 9 giorni, all'orario normale dei seminari di asimmetrie, cioè il giovedì alle 18:30, faremo la presentazione del libro Materia Rara, di cui vedo 2 esemplari alle spalle dell'autore Gianclaudio Torlizzi. Interverranno il professor Carlo Andrea Bollino dell'Università di Perugia, uno dei nostri massimi esperti italiani di economia delle fonti di energia. Interverrà Sergio Giraldo, un consulente molto affermato e editorialista sulla Verità, e il seminario sarà moderato da Camilla Conti della Verità, una giornalista che segue con molta attenzione le vicende economiche. Sono molto molto contento di aver avuto Rodrigo, e poi spero anche di vederlo di persona quando la sua attività accademica lo porterà in Europa. Naturalmente lui sarà a Copenaghen, come ha detto, però essendo abituato alla scala della Cina, per lui venire da Copenaghen a Roma sarà come per me andare dai Parioli all'Eur, quindi siamo tutte proporzioni gardite. Grazie mille a tutti, e quindi chiedo alla regia di interrompere qui la trasmissione. È un esperimento che ripeteremo.
Ciao Rodrigo, a presto.
Grazie.
Ciao Rodrigo, ciao Claudio.
Alberto, come sempre, as always, love you. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Ciao. Gianclaudio, grazie.